teachers of Reddit, what is the saddest thing you found out about a student? My mom taught at a school in a bad neighborhood in Chicago in the mid-90s. There was a second grader that would save his milk and ketchup packers from lunch for his mom so she had something to eat when she got home from work. Not a teacher but was a school-based therapist. Had a student, 7-8 years old, I didn't know, knock on my office door and ask if I'd adopt her and, if you have room, my brother too, but if not, that's okay, we can be split up. We're split up now. And I don't take up space. I just need a sleeping bag. Broke my heart. It was right after winter break and before class started. I was just talking with some students and asked if they got anything fun for the holidays. One girl said, "Oh no, I don't ever get presents, my mom is a drug addict. But I went out and got some stuff for my little sister so that she can have a real Christmas." She just said it so matter of fact. She was so used to being the parent to her little sister that she didn't even care about her own childhood. It totally broke my heart. I teach 5th grade and I had a student that found their father after he had killed himself. The student did not come out and tell me this. I found out about it at the conference with the grandfather. For your information, the student had a great support system and was an excellent student. One of my students got into a car accident the year after I had him in my class. He was driving. He was about 16 at the time. His little brother and sister died in the accident. They were 13 and 6 years old. He and his mom were listed as critical condition, but the school didn't notify us on how they were doing after that. This was in late 2020, so COVID made it hard to get that information. I hope he's doing well. Grade 4 student, 9 at start of year, only child, whose dad had died from lung cancer a few weeks before she started new at our school. Mom was an immigrant who couldn't speak the language, so the daughter would translate for us. About 6 months into the year, she was off for a few days. I got a call to come to reception one morning to meet the girl's auntie from the foreign country. We had another teacher who came to translate. Her mom was dying of lung cancer. She died a couple of weeks later. The girl was taken abroad to live with her auntie. She was the most outgoing, precocious, happy, empathic little girl. I adored her. I think about her still 5 years later. Parents divorced. Neither wanted custody of the child. Another student was skipping school. After some investigation, we found out that he was arranging to meet his siblings in a park as they had been split up in foster care, and this was the only way he could see them. Third example. Student went to live with a family friend while the mom was in prison. Mom got out of prisons and had to move in with the family friend, who was then 8 meters pregnant with the student's baby. I am an elementary bilingual teacher in a small Midwestern town. Last year, at the beginning of the year, we got a new 1st grader from Mexico. Being the only Spanish-speaking staff member in the building, I helped enroll the little girl and became the primary contact between the school and mom. I also worked with her in her classroom to help her acclimate and understand her schoolwork. When I helped mom enroll the daughter, she mentioned that the girl had never been to school in Mexico due to a very traumatic event. She didn't go into detail, and I was uncomfortable asking for money, as we had just met. About a month later, while working on an assignment with her in class, the little girl told me she was really excited because her dad would be picking her up from the bus stop the following day. I was surprised since the mom had told me it was just her, the student, and another younger sibling here in the United States. There was no father ever mentioned. The following morning, the little girl ran up to me again and was super excited because her dad would be picking her up after school from the bus. About an hour later, I got a text from the mom. She said the little girl had told her that she had told me her dad was coming. But there was no dad. Turns out that a year and a half prior, while still in Mexico, some men came into their house, tied up the mom and the dad, pistol whipped them both in front of her then 4 and 2-year-old daughters, then took the dad away and murdered him. The little girl had made up the story about her dad coming to pick her up because she saw other kids with their dads and wanted to be like them. A kid having to get a medical certificate to prove her hair was naturally not just all black, so she wouldn't be forced to pay to get her hair colored and touched up every month. Japan, and poliosis. Idiot. The school's policy was that hair must be its natural color, plainly styled, and of a specified length. Given that ethnically almost everyone is Japanese there, that usually means straight and black. The only difference between the hair rules for boys and girls is in terms of hair length. In terms of raw numbers, not having naturally straight plain black hair is more unusual than having a clearly visible physical disability, even when you take into account the non-ethnic Japanese population of the country. Add in a culture in which conformity is encouraged, and an awareness that hair can be easily styled and colored, and it's easy for people to assume that any non-standard hair on someone who otherwise passes for ethnic Japanese is a choice rather than natural. This doesn't justify the rule or the actions taken, of course, but does explain how it came to be. I was only a substitute, but found out one of the kids at one of my regular schools, who always seemed a bit spacey, was a refugee who was brain damaged due to malnutrition from growing up during a civil war. A student of mine was a major issue in the school and was well known throughout all the faculty for causing many issues. I was his only male teacher in the 7th grade, so for some reason I was the only one who could get through to him. He and I came to an agreement that he would finish at least 50% of the work so that he could get the full grade. One week, he missed all of school and was nowhere to be seen, so I called his home and his grandma told me what was going on. Turns out the kid's mom was a street wanderer and would show up once every 3 or 6 months, and his dad was in jail for selling and consuming different drugs. The reason why he wasn't at school was because his mom had showed up and he had stayed up every single night that she was there that week. He would sit by the front door to make sure she wouldn't leave him. The day that I called was the day that he returned to school, and the reason why he came back was because he had fallen asleep at the door, and when he woke up she was gone. He came to school with very big, dark circles underneath his eyes, and I let him sleep in class since I understood that he would not be able to do what he needed to do that day. The student who I sat next to him was considered the mom of the grade, and she lent him her sweater so he could use it as a pillow when he slept on his desk. After that, he did everything I asked him to do regardless of how difficult it was, and he cried when I had to leave the school because I was done with student teaching. I still think about him a lot and I hope that he's doing well. A kid had gotten antsy at the age of 4. Last year one of my 13-year-old students was diagnosed with leukemia. He passed away within a month of being diagnosed. We had a kid join the school who had been abused by her parents and forced to live in a kennel outside. So much of her case was emotionally crushing, but what truly haunted me was that she had to be taken back to the house regularly because she missed the dogs she had shared a garden with. I truly hope her parents burn in hell for eternity skewered on Lucifer's pitchfork. I've heard from a few kids that at one point they tried to kill themselves. I have my own mental problems, so it always breaks my heart to hear that these kids are nowhere in the same spot I was a few years ago. Another one of my kids just lost his dog a month ago or so ago and he was so broken up about it. He stopped doing anything, even talking. I asked if he was depressed and he just unloaded about this dog. Poor kid was sobbing. He's doing better now, but it was still heartbreaking. Second-hand story from my mom, elementary teacher for 30-ish years. She had a hug or a handshake out the door policy, just some small contact and a proper goodbye, and had this young boy who always picked the hug. She wondered why he always went for it. Most kids would go back and forth depending on their mood that day, so she asked him why he was always so excited for the end-of-day hug. His answer, "It's the only one I ever get." First grader and third grader hid in their basement for 2 days over the weekend after Dad killed Mom. They thought if they stayed hid until the bus came Monday that he would let them live. It worked. That one of my students, quiet and reserved, had killed a pedestrian with his car, was old enough to drive. Can't imagine how it feels to carry that secret around with you. English teacher here. A student wrote an essay going into the extreme details of a sexual assault. I referred the paper to the school psychologist, and the next thing I knew was CPS turning up at the school. Turns out the student was raped by her father. Some children found out through a teacher that couldn't keep her mouth shut, and the student had a mental breakdown when commentary was dropped. The teacher that blabbered faced no consequences. The children got a slap on the hand. My heart still bleeds for the kid. She transferred schools and the father is in prison. I kind of feel like I fucked up the kid's life, and I know that she's not the only child that has had to deal with those issues. Teaching sucks when the true cruelty of humanity shows itself. It sucks a person dry at times, and I believe that most teachers that comment on this thread will tell horrific tales of their own experiences. To my fellow teachers, just carry on. We know of the difficulties of the job. Please don't give up, unless you're one of those heartless assholes that can't show empathy, then kindly F off. Math teacher here. Had a student who was quiet and reserved. Smart kid. Felt like maybe I should have talked to him more often. The year after he left school, he killed himself. I wondered what if for a while. I now follow my gut feeling more often. It has made a difference on a few occasions. Those times I am grateful to do what I do. Teachers can make a difference, follow your heart. High school student was always very quiet and not very good grade-wise. She panicked when confronted with the fact that her parents will need to come to the next parent-teacher conference. It was shrugged off as normal teenager behavior. Who wants their parents in school listening about how bad things are? But a few days later she jumped out the window of her apartment and died later that week in the hospital. We found out she was terrified of her parents. Like really terrified, so when they wanted to go yell at her again, she locked herself in her room and didn't see another way out than jump from the 4th story onto the street. We had no clue it was this bad. The whole family of one of our students was killed by a giant boulder. They live on a mountainside and it was raining heavily for a week. The boulder was bigger than their house and easily crushed the house along with the family. The student was only able to survive because she was not home at the time. She was conducting her thesis in our university. I have a few that haunt me. All high school kids. One was severely neglected, for example, from the age of 7. She had to keep herself and her baby sister alive by stealing food and formula, and walked herself to hospital with a burst appendix age 11. By the time I taught her, she was so violent and disruptive that she could barely be in a classroom, but for some reason we got along. And out of desperation the school ended up taking her out of her regular classes and putting her with me all day. She was actually a very sweet kid minus 16, but emotionally frozen at around a 5-6-year-old level, I think. Her foster home situation fell apart and she moved away, but I still think of her often. Another girl was really disruptive and loud and odd, difficulties settling into class, making and keeping friends, etc. Found out she was adopted as a toddler from a Romanian orphanage under Ceausescu, and had brain and developmental damage from being tied up in a cot for the first 2 years of her life with no human contact. The third still haunts me, was doing some relief teaching, so wasn't in regular contact with this kid. But there was one girl that was like a little ghost, extraordinarily pale and subdued and withdrawn. Turned out her family was extremely religious and had decided she was possessed by the devil. No one in her family had spoken to her or made eye contact with her for 2 years, and she was made to live outside in a shed. They fed her, and that was it. Another was refugee kid from Somalia, who was very shy and hardly ever spoke. We were having a class discussion, and for some reason we're talking about how chickens can keep running around after they get their heads cut off, and in a moment of silence she says, "My mom didn't do that when her head got cut off." People suck sometimes.